In the autumn of 1822, the smartest investors in London queued up to buy pieces of a country. The bonds were printed beautifully. The exchange rate was fixed. The guidebook ran to 350 pages. Soil reports, harbour charts, a capital city with an opera house. 250 people sold everything they owned and boarded ships to start new lives there. Here is the problem. The country did not exist. Not badly governed, not exaggerated, not there. And by the end of this story, the man who invented it will walk free and be buried as a national hero. This is Built and Broken. And this story begins, of all places, with a war hero. Gregor MacGregor was born in Scotland in 1786, into a family with a talent for stories. His grandfather had fought for kings. His clan had a legend for every scar. Gregor joined the British Army at 16, bought his way up the ranks, and when promotion slowed, he simply sailed to South America, where revolutions were hiring. He fought for Venezuela. He fought well, at least sometimes, and married into the family of Simón Bolívar himself. In an age before photographs, before background checks, a man was whatever his uniform, his accent, and his medals said he was. Remember that. It's the engine of everything that follows. In 1820, MacGregor landed on the Mosquito Coast of Central America. 8 million acres of mangrove, sandflies, and rain. A local king, in exchange for rum and jewelry, signed over a stretch of shoreline. Most men would have seen a swamp. MacGregor saw a prospectus. He returned to London not as a soldier, but as His Serene Highness Gregor I, Cazique of Poyais, and London believed him. He had a coat of arms designed, a national anthem, offices in the city. He wrote a 350-page guidebook under a false name, describing the capital, St. Joseph, its cathedral, its banks, its opera house, in the confident detail of a man describing his own street. The book was fiction, every page, but it was specific fiction, and specificity is what trust is made of. 1822 was the perfect year to sell a country. Britain was rich, peace had broken out, and government bonds paid 3%. Investors were desperate for anything better, and the new South American republics were the crypto of the age. Colombia borrowed millions, Chile borrowed millions, Peru borrowed millions. So when Poyais floated a £200,000 loan on the London Exchange, nobody blinked. The bonds were handled by a respected bank. They were printed by the same firm that printed for the Bank of England. The machinery of every great fraud, again, borrowed credibility, this time with engraved borders. And ordinary people went further than the bankers. MacGregor's agents opened offices in London and Edinburgh, selling not just bonds but land. 100 acres for the price of a Scottish workman's monthly wage. He sold commissions in the Poyais army, licenses to trade, places at the National Theatre, Scottish families, clerks, farmers, a banker, a cobbler who'd been promised the title of royal shoemaker, packed their tools, their savings, and their children. In September 1822, the Honduras packet sailed from London. In January, the Kennersley Castle followed from Leith, with nearly 200 emigrants singing on deck. They carried trunks of formal clothes for the opera, and chests of Poyais dollars, paper money MacGregor had printed himself, which they had bought with real sterling from their new sovereign. Think about that exchange for a moment. They gave him the only real thing in the story. He gave them paper from a country that didn't exist. The Honduras packet reached the Mosquito Coast in November. The settlers stood at the rail, charts in hand, looking for the harbour of St. Joseph. There was no harbour. There was no city, no cathedral, no opera house, no royal bank of Poyais. There was jungle, swamp, and a beach, and the ruins of a settlement abandoned decades earlier, which the guidebook had dressed up as a capital. They unloaded anyway. What else do you do? An ocean from home, holding banknotes of a nation that isn't there. Then the second ship arrived with 200 more. The rains came, then malaria, then yellow fever. The royal shoemaker, a man who had given up a real trade for a fictional title, took his own life. When rescue ships finally carried the survivors to Belize, officials counted what was left. Of some 250 settlers who sailed for Poyais, at least 180 were dead. And here is the detail that should be impossible. When news reached London, some of the survivors defended him. They signed a statement swearing the Cazique had been deceived by his agents. The story was too specific to be a lie, the bonds too beautiful, the uniform too convincing. The fraud had been engineered so well that its victims repaired it themselves. Any normal story ends here. Trial, prison, disgrace. Instead, MacGregor moved to Paris and did the whole thing again. New investors, a new loan, £300,000 this time. A new constitution for Poyais, now a republic, because French investors preferred republics. When French authorities finally arrested him in 1825, he was tried and acquitted. The paperwork, the courts found, was all technically in order. Of course it was. Paperwork was the one thing he manufactured domestically. He returned to London and kept selling Poyais, bonds in 1827, land certificates into the 1830s, each scheme smaller, shabbier, to buyers who somehow still existed. The country that never existed was liquidated slowly, like any failing company. Trust, it turns out, has a resale market. In 1838, old and broke, MacGregor sailed to Venezuela, the country he'd actually fought for, and asked for a pension. They gave it to him. Full general's rank, back pay, honors. When he died in Caracas in 1845, he was buried with military ceremony in the National Cathedral. The man who killed 180 Scots with a fountain pen lies in a hero's grave. So what do we do with this story 200 years later? Every fraud in this series borrows the trust machinery of its era. The crypto queen borrowed state banquet halls and blockchain dreams. MacGregor borrowed engraved bonds, guidebooks, and the word of a gentleman, the information technology of 1822. The tools change. The machine is the same: specificity, borrowed credibility, and a story people want to be inside. But MacGregor teaches one lesson the crypto queen never could. She was caught because her money remembered everything. He walked free because his money remembered nothing. No ledger, no record, no way home for a Poyais dollar. Between those two stories sit 2 centuries of every scheme in between. We'll meet them one at a time. Built and broken. Subscribe. The next collapse is already in the archive.